Our final speaker today is the only person to have accompanied Connie from her first breath to her last. We must welcome Sam and Connie's big sister, Hilde.
I was 8 when Connie came along, and she was all right for a crying, stinky baby. But like all big sisters, I fell in love with her really quickly and carted her around. It was also a good time for the family. Dad had started renovating houses as a way to support us, and we were in house number 2 at this stage, and most of it even had floors. Mum was having a period of stability with her mental illnesses, and she carted Connie around on her hip as her belly got bigger and bigger with Sam. Once Sam was born, the house was finished. We were up in Dalesford, by the way, and we came to Melbourne. And it was a really good time for me and the kids. We didn't have a telly, so it was just walks and games and making tents out of bed sheets. And we saw Mum less and less as her mental illness overtook her. And when Connie was 4, Mum suicided. It was tough, but tougher for Connie because she'd had that time with Mum during her wellness, and she missed her terribly. And it was about the same time that Connie started having terrible tantrums. They were hurricanes and they lasted days, but we had a cure. We'd all hop in the car and go and visit Auntie Marg and Uncle George. And we'd leave Connie there for a bit, and she revelled in her time there. Dad, Sam and I didn't have the same standards as our Connie. She was organised and everything had to be just so. All her pens and texters were lined up in coloured order in different drawers, and her clothes were in coloured order in the cupboard, and we just didn't see things the same way. But she'd go up to Auntie Marg and sit on Auntie Marg's hip and score dresses off people in the neighbourhood. And back at home, Sam and I in our mismatched op-shop clothes with our flared cords and our velveteen jumpers. But we were happy. But Connie loved being fancy, and she'd come back home with her new dresses and line them all up. And during all this time, we were moving every year while Dad renovated. And Connie didn't like moving much. We loved it, new people, new things, but Connie was a nester. In about grade 2 or 3, after yet another move, Connie decided not to speak for 8 months as a protest. We'd still play games and she'd laugh, but she wouldn't speak. We had meetings at the school and Dad would say, "She'll be right, she'll speak when she's ready. Moving's character building." Sorry. So I became a teenager and left home and went to Sydney. And I'd come back to visit, and Connie would always make these Welcome Home Hilde banners. And they were all coloured in perfectly and had lollies stuck on them. She loved her craft. And one time when they'd moved to Adelaide, they stayed there for a couple of years, and it was a great period of stability for Connie. She was really happy there. On one of my visits home, the cat had had kittens, and there was a really big well in the backyard, and one of the kittens had fallen down the well. So these days you call the fire brigade and get the cat rescue on the front of the local paper. But in those days, you know, Dad said, "Oh, well, we just have to cover it up and move on. We can't do anything." And that was not acceptable to Connie. Not acceptable at all. So she came up to me and she said, "Well, we have to save Millie." So we lay on our stomachs and we looked down the well, and I suggested we get some sheets and a washing basket, and we tied them together. And for hours we tried to coax this cat into getting into the basket, but every time the basket would get near it, she'd just look further and further around the well. And it started to get dark, and I had the temerity to suggest we have a dinner break. No. Connie went and got the torch. And eventually we did get the cat in the basket, and she would never have been saved without Connie's sheer determination. The Connie train. So the family moved back to Melbourne, and I went back to Sydney, and on we went. And then I got a phone call from Dad. Bam, cancer. She was 11. So I packed up some stuff and little baby Jono and moved to Melbourne immediately. And although there was chemo and vomiting, she embraced the other stuff that came with being a cancer kid. There were the canteen camps and visiting celebrities, and the day came we got the form from Make-A-Wish, so she could make her wish. And we've all seen the kids taking these amazing trips and all that sort of stuff. But all Connie had ever wanted was a sewing machine. So she wrote that down as choice number 1. She was worried it might be a bit expensive, so as choice number 2 she put down new bike. It would be the first new bike in the family. Not that there's anything wrong with trading post bikes. And her modesty was rewarded by Make-A-Wish, and she got the sewing machine and a new bike. And down the track, she even got a trip to America without even asking. So a few years went on, and she went into remission. And by this stage, Connie was a headstrong teenager. She decided she was grown up and told me that she was going to leave home because she can't live with Dad and Sam any longer. And having done that myself, I knew how hard it could be. But I also knew how determined she was. So I suggested that we get a place together. Said you'd have to get a job and pay your rent and pay your own way, you know, because we're a working family. And so Connie, Jono and I found ourselves renting the flat above the gun shop in North Melbourne. She had a job within a few days, she'd enrolled in the local high school, and she paid her way. And one day I heard 2 sets of footsteps coming up the side steps. And she threw open the door and she said, "Hilda, this is Em and she needs somewhere to stay." And that's how Hilda's House for People Suffering Temporary Defeat was born. And so while all this was going on, Dad had put the thousands of books we used to have to box up and carry around every move into a shop in Aspendale. And between our jobs and our studies, Connie and I'd go up a day a week and mind the shop, and we decided that we should do it as well. And so we rented a shop in North Melbourne up the road. And it was large, and we sheltered many a wayward teenager there. There were the 2 Naomis, there was Rachel, whose boobs caught on fire when she tried to scramble an egg. And little Amy up in the attic. I know you're here, Amy. And before too long, we had more books than space, so we opened another shop out in Hawthorn. They never made any money, but we all had a place to live. And one day, Connie was walking down Glenferrie Road, and the young chap who worked in the noodle shop over the way walked up behind Connie and slapped her on the bottom with his leather notebook. This was at the height of Connie's angry young woman days. I would have expected her to punch him in the face or have a verbal tantrum. She still had thunderstorm tantrums even at this stage. But no, Mike stayed the night. Dad popped into her room the next day and saw Mike there. And he rang me up immediately and he said, "Hey Hilda, Connie's just met the bloke she's going to spend the rest of her life with." And she did. After Mike finished uni, he got a highfalutin job up in Canberra, and off they went. And Connie built an online bookshop and worked in disability services. We're a working family. One day she took herself for a drive out to the country and bought a church. No consultation, not even with Mike. And it wasn't a lovely little country church that you're picturing. It had no roof and holes in the walls and cows living in it. But she had a vision. And Mike hopped on the Connie train and saw the vision through with her. And once it was renovated, they got married in it. And it actually became a bookshop as well. Yeah. And Connie had the boys, and of course we weren't expecting that after the first cancer. And it was a great delight. So we spent the next few years visiting each other and watching our kids grow up. And when Willoughby turned 4, bam, cancer. I think the next 7 years have been fairly well covered. But in between the chemo and the vomiting, we had some great times. There was Connie's first last Christmas in Meetung with the wider family. What happens in Meetung stays in Meetung. And there was a family games night up in Noosa. It's an all play! So there was great family time in between her and Sam working their butts off for Love Your Sister. So I'm going to skip forward to the last 5 days. I couldn't leave her side. Despite the trauma of losing a loved one, we banded together. We regaled her with tales of old times and we sang songs. She'd hum along when she could. Jono put on the Hilltop Hoods at one stage and Connie went, no more Hilltop Hoods. And if ever you're faced with a bedside vigil, embrace it. It's a beautiful thing. And just know that your loved ones can hear you. Although I do have one piece of advice, and that's pack enough undies. All your undies. On the second last night, Sam gave Connie the news that she'd been awarded the OAM, and her face lit up, and she said, wow, and she said, it's the pinnacle of my professional career. So we swanned around the room, pretending we were all fancy and calling her Lady Cotton Socks OAM for her services to humanity. And the next morning her health had deteriorated, but she lifted when the Governor-General arrived, and she shook his hand and showed off her medal. And we had a short time to celebrate it with her before she went to sleep and didn't wake up again. We continued to tell her stories as she lay there, and at 1 o'clock the next day she died. So I'm just going to backtrack for a sec here. Connie had been most specific with her instructions on what was to happen next. We discussed warm autopsies and operations where they can harvest live cancer cells and gain knowledge to help cure cancer. We got the guys from Garvin here today. Thanks for coming. And so when she died, we had a job to do. We had the team of doctors waiting on standby in Sydney, and it was my first phone call. It's time, we're ready. The Tobin man came in about 10 minutes, and Sam and I wrapped her up and zipped her up and put her on the trolley and wheeled her to the car. And we sent her on her way. And she was still working after death. We're a working family. And we're going to continue to work in her name. And so rather than bow our heads, I'm going to ask everyone to be upstanding. Because we're going Johnson style. We're going to stand nice and tall and have our chins up. We're going to hold up our glasses. To Connie.